Well, good day, relatives. This is Warrior Dan, your host for Warrior Evolution. And today I'm doing, I don't know, I guess a podcast slash vidcast, which we're going to call, I'm not sure what we're going to call it, but we're in the studio, John Anderson. So big thank you to John for producing this. And I'm call this the Homestead Studio. And I'm here with my longtime friend and peer, Jeffery Grundtner. I'll introduce in a moment. And I'm just here to really welcome everybody to pay attention to this sort of inaugural podcast and vidcast. It's some really good stuff coming up. And I'm really excited because I'm getting ready to launch a dream child that I've been nurturing in my spirit for a long time. And that's the Seven Feathers Society nonprofit, which has just sort of come into being this year, producing its first Sober Clean Warrior weekend. And this is a culmination of a lot of work I've been doing in recovery, addiction, spirit-based recovery for all people. And the focus lately has been on men. And why is men's work so important right now? And how are men learning to come together in healing ways, following different traditions, following the guidance of, well, just men who've been there and done that. We live in a very rich environment of men's community here in Minnesota. We have in the shadows of Robert Bly Minnesota Men's Conference. We have Mankind Project, one of the oldest communities for that here in Minnesota. We've got one of the only surviving men's centers in the country, and there was sort of a plethora of men's centers that sprang up in the 80s and 90s, and we're one of the last ones remaining. Twin Cities Men's Center in Minneapolis. Also, the current Minnesota Men's Conference running their weekends now, including this weekend coming up. But what I'm really here to talk about is the weekend that we're doing at Seven Feathers Society, which is Sacred Heart Warrior is a camp us for men seeking greater spiritual support, alternative resources, and recovery. And we're going into this with our hearts open, our minds and spirits coming together to see what kind of new sacred space we can create together to do men's work. Very excited about this project. There's lots of ways we cut this up and talk about it, but I think we'll save some of the details of men's work for later. Right now, I want to talk about a very important context for ritual work and healing work, and that is through the lens of cosmos, through astrotheology, through astrology and astronomy, the great being above us, and understanding all the great symbols and energies and stories that we can translate up there. And to help us with this conversation, we have with us my brother Jeffery Grundtner. And Jeffrey is a shaman who works with both earth and sky, as well as people. He is an astrologer and a healer. He's also a spiritual advisor, a teacher, and a ceremonialist. Jeffrey has worked for decades bringing the magic of sky and earth together in a meaningful way. We've participated in a lot of ceremonies together over the years and a lot of different kind of activities. A significant part of Jeffrey's path included being adopted into the Dakota spiritual way of being 35 years ago. And we have worked together in ceremony with all people, particularly mentoring men and boys dealing with addiction. Jeffrey, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you very much, Kola. Thanks for being here, brother.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate you inviting me to be part of this. I'm glad to be here.
So here we are, we're coming up to October 8th, 9th, and 10th. We have the Sober Clean Warrior Weekend. I think we're going to put some links to this on the website, but today what we want to know is, what is going on with the cosmos regarding this weekend, and why is that important? Why do we turn to the stars? Why do we turn to the cosmic map, and what does it have to tell us today?
So let's just kind of dive into that whole notion of one aspect of that is that the sky and the movements of the sky and the planets that people have been studying these for literally thousands of years, and have found the correlate in in our human behavior and endeavors and so on. And so they're signs to us when these things are moving, and if we know how to interpret them, there's a reflection in the human psyche. and this is one of the things that Jungian, Carl Jung focused on, and it's a synchronistic kind of thing as opposed to the cause and effect. It doesn't, science looks for cause and effect, and in this case it's synchronistic. We know it's true, we have the evidence, but we can't point to something exactly, so it lives a little bit in the mystery.
I've heard this described as things mutually arriving at the same
Yes.
time in different space or time, right?
Right, right. So, and given that, the idea is that the more in tune we are with the universe, whether it's in nature and we see something that happens and it's significant and it reflects something within ourselves, and the sky is likewise an extension of nature. So,
well, that's very different than just say looking at the sort of scientific explanations of how this heavenly bodies interact with us, right? And that sort of thing. There's that other side of it, the philosophical aspect of it.
yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that is happening this week, we just had a new moon yesterday. I have to check myself because of the time. Time is very dilated right now. And with that new moon, several other cycles are converging. So I'm going to give just a little brief explanation of what the dynamics are on the sky, and then I want to go into story so that we're not getting technical about it.
Sure.
But in essence, when we are looking at the movements of the planets right now, we had the new moon, and the new moon cycle that always signifies the ending of one and the beginning of another. It's a conception point when two bodies come together in relation, and then there's a cycle, there's a movement that unfolds, a dynamic unfolds with that. And that's true not only of the new moon, when the moon is with the sun, but any other planet when it comes in conjunction, we call it, when it comes into union with another planet as we see it in the sky.
There's a relationship there.
There's a relationship that's created, and then there's a dynamic that unfolds. And then there's a context within which that happens that we have noticed are linked to seasons, and not just like we're in the fall season, but in this case we're really talking about a philosophical field, a background, a morphogenic field, if you will, in which is a lens or a playing field on which these energies take place. So you're looking at archetypes, Jungian concept, working in areas of life. This is how we take the information we're gleaning from the sky and relate it to the human experience. And so this week we have several going on all at once. The new moon was very tightly close to Mars as it looks in the sky. And Mars represents that principle of assertiveness, about going out, taking action, going out into the world. And
I feel that.
And it's very much, has long been associated with men or masculinity, so it's a primary principle of the sacred masculine, if you will. And so that, while it was very tight on yesterday, it's still tight today. It becomes exact actually tonight when Mars is exactly with the sun. So we're literally in the omega of the last cycle and the beginning of a new cycle in terms of the Mars principle.
There's a transformation of the masculine energy. Is that
Yeah, exactly? There's a shamanic death and rebirth of the masculine energy. If we want to focus on it consciously, which is what we're talking about, we want to encourage people to do this. Otherwise, it happens unconsciously.
Where I think you might fall down and get hit or something. Like that's how you get your aha.
Right. Or, there's other dynamics, which, we kind of won't necessarily go into, but the ways to really activate this, and that's where ceremony really comes in, is because we want to step into a different reality and allow our interaction and our dynamic with the energy to bring about what we're really we may be working towards, or allowing the universe to work through us, and so on. So it's that Mars cycle. There's also, to include here, we've got Mercury, which is in a retrograde motion. So to us, it appears as though it's going backwards. So this is the Heyoka phase of Mercury.
Uh-oh.
This is the
Feeling
trickster.
that.
He's walking backwards
So interesting.
towards the sun. Okay.
Just this morning, when I was driving back from picking, I dropped off my son at school,
Yep.
and I was going down the road, down Mendota Heights towards the river, and I saw what flew across the road. I thought was an eagle because I saw the white head and the black body, or the dark body, right? So it's like the eagle.
Yeah.
But then as soon as it kind of left a little bit of the shaft of the sunlight, it was a crow.
Oh, wow, that's
And
perfect.
at first I thought it was, oh, I see an eagle, and then no, it's a crow. And it's just like that. Oh, that's that trickster energy that you had been suggesting. And I really
Right.
felt that today.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because that leads me right into another aspect of this, and I'm gonna put 2 or 3 layers in it, and then I'll focus on the story. But the other aspect is that it's this new moon and Mars thing is happening directly aligned with a star that was considered one of the magical stars, that the alchemists used in ancient time, and some of that knowledge has been lost, but some of the stories survive. Well, it happens to be the right wing of Corvus, which is it's the raven.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Raven or crow, I mean, it depends, but the Corvus represents both. In this case, the story is gonna reference a raven.
Right.
So,
Now, this is a Corvus according to the old system of seeing.
Yeah,
seeing. Okay.
right. Well, and it's a constellation. It's a designated constellation, but the Greeks saw they saw that as raven in a certain part of the sky. So what we have is that these conjunctions, these beginnings, these endings and beginnings of these cycles are happening in that region.
Wow, it really suggests mystery and something going on with that like you said, that backwards or trickster energy coming into play here.
Absolutely.
How does that work in context to this masculine transformation?
Okay, so one of the things the way that we refer to it too is that when it's with the sun, we can't see those things, and so in a sense we think of it as being in the underworld, but not in a dark place, but rather in the radiance of great mystery. Sun is the source of life, right? And it represents spirit, and it references the human heart, which is both a receptor and a beacon of light, receptor of soul and a beacon of light, the heart.
The sun embedded in matter, almost like Osiris in the underworld or something like that, or the spirit in the body or something like that.
Right. And Mars is in that underworld. Mars is, I mean, if we start creating some metaphors here, this is the warrior who's at the Sundance tree right now. He's there with the sun, to let the old self fall away so he can embody more spirit.
Wow.
And Mercury is doing the same thing. He's in this trickster mode. Well, Mercury gets to be the one who travels through all 3 worlds, as you may remember from your mythology.
The messenger.
He's in the underworld right now.
Okay.
And the trickster aspect, he's, if we want to bring it quickly into kind of a personal thing, is what's going on in your unconscious or subconscious. That's going to be more emergent than your ordinary, middle world stuff. I have to decide to do this and show up here and do that.
Right.
And there's another part where he'll be in the upper world, but they're all in the underworld right now,
and it's
going
bubbling
through
up.
this process. It's all bubbling up.
Okay.
All right. So that's maybe enough background. Let's launch into a story. Now, there's a number of stories that can go along with this, but one that I picked up on, and I've already gotten some good juicy stuff out of personally and for others, is that this region of the sky, we'll start with that. Okay, so in the Corvus or Raven was the bird of Apollo. Okay,
Sun again.
the sun.
Okay.
And there you go. So, and Apollo decides he's going to have a celebration for Zeus or Jupiter. All right? I mean, I might as well add in as I'm telling this. I mean, I could tell it in more story like, but what the heck? So Jupiter, Zeus, that's the philosopher king. That is the principles by which we govern our life. So if we think about it, the heart and spirit is saying, we're going to celebrate the principles by which we expand and unfold our life.
Right.
And he sends Raven off. He says, realize he's got to have water for this
of course.
celebration. Okay?
Water has a whole other thing.
But, the mini
Okay.
wachoni wakan, the sacred water of life.
Okay.
He needs that, right? He needs that for
Can't
the
have a feast
celebration.
without it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So he sends Raven off to do that. Raven is flying along and he sees, oh, look at that fig tree. He goes down, takes a rest, and he's hanging out there and he's going, but you notice they're not quite ripe yet. So he's like, well, I'll just hang out here for a while. I'll let them get ripen up, and then I'll have, So he's hanging out, waiting for the fruit to get ready to drop, and then,
Wow.
he feasts.
Okay.
Now he's like, oh, crap. I forgot I was supposed to get the water for this celebration for the,
He got lost on the way.
He got, yeah. And so, not wanting to get Apollo angry, he looks around and he goes, there's a snake. So he goes down and he grabs the snake and he brings that back and he makes up this excuse. The snake prevented me from carrying out my task.
The scape snake.
Yeah, the scape snake, exactly. So Apollo, seeing right through his BS right away, and gets angry, and so he ordains that Raven will never be able to drink before the figs are ripe. And to memorialize that, he casts those into the sky, and so in the sky there's Raven. Next to it is Crater, which is the cup.
Okay.
And beneath that is Hydra, which is the snake.
I see.
All right?
And it's all there in the stars.
It's all there
there's
in the
story.
stars. And these planetary cycles, which represent these archetypal energies that are playing out in our lives, Mercury being the mind and the messenger. And then we've already said there's sun, and Moon was there too. And there's another way that Venus will play into this. But this is the story that we're focused on, and where the lessons are here, where some of the lessons can be gleaned. Because one of the things we know is there's a lot of stories we can connect to this, and this is a particular Greek story, and at first you're like, but if you allow it to speak to you, then some things will come through, because if a story survives, as we know in the mythic poetic tradition that men's work is based on, is if a story survives for hundreds or thousands of years, then it's not just something about where these things are in the sky.
It's more than that. It's more than a Genesis story. It's got some substance to it.
It's got something to it that speaks to us. And so we could see, before I add some other things, let's just add some pieces here. It's like, well, okay, so Crater, that cup, the container of the water of life.
But it's also the Grail Maiden's Cup going into the fall season.
Exactly.
And the blessing of leadership that comes with that, right? And not being able to access that.
Exactly. Not being able to access that water of life. And what is his excuse? Her excuse. What's Raven's excuse? Is the snake. Well, what is this? The snake represents the Kundalini. It represents the passions of life.
That instinctual energy that's driving inside our bones.
And so that's the distraction or the excuse, and not the full integration, right?
Interesting. My instincts got carried away. I'm,
Yeah.
blame it on my instinct, blame it on this part of me instead of taking ownership,
Right,
or something like that.
And of course,
That's amazing.
as we know, the activation of the Kundalini, and so it's no longer about just a switchboard.
Okay.
It's no longer about the spine and nervous system, about the switchboard, but the activation of Kundalini is that spiritual dynamo that allows full embodiment and integration and spiritual realization. So that's another player in this.
That's interesting, because if we were able to actually access our energy and be in that full authority, as it were, we wouldn't end up in that predicament.
Right.
But to blame instinct and energy for something that we did with our mind, or we got tricked into something, or appetite, right? So it's kind of like the body gets blamed for something that's happening, or that energy, or primal energy that we have, is sort of like hapless, but it's still sitting there wanting us to do something with it.
Exactly.
Right? Within reach, but not quite able to access
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
So you see how rich this is, and that the idea of the masculine spirit is going through this death and rebirth with that story as a background. And one other piece to add to that is that another way that we look at it, it's also going through this to becoming the new Mars, the new masculine aspect, with the signature of co-equal relationship. It's happening in the sign of Libra. And so there's a whole lot of things that we can say about that.
There's a whole other context, because now we're the masculine and feminine balance and all that other stuff going on in the background.
Right.
Okay.
And of course it's always, within us. I mean, the old paradigm was, they took on particular roles, and that in terms of men, it narrowed their focus about who they could be, what is masculinity, and it's like this, one thing, when we know it's a broad spectrum of things. But those, I'm adding interpretation. If we were just going to, which is part of it, we're all going to feel or find ourselves somewhere in the story, and and it's kind of the whole thing, as we're talking about the whole thing. And so some of the questions we can ask ourselves is, where in my life is the excuse more appealing than the truth?
Ooh, wow.
All right? And there's a bunch of obvious ones, dog ate my homework. That's an obvious one. But if you actually meditate on it a little bit, and if you actually put it out there without an expectation, and you ask Spirit, you ask yourself, your inner self, where am I doing that? You could have a whole construct in your life that is the excuse from you acting from your heart.
That's right.
And from the principles of your philosopher, king or queen.
Now, that gives me a lot of just chills right away, because I think about doing this work with men in addiction and recovery and overcoming those challenges. Men are often operating with this driving program that has created the false self, or that mask.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of excuse making in there. There's a lot of, illusion that we're sort of riding on. And part of the men's work is to unmask the game and to get real and to reconnect with what's going on underneath that, right? So it's pointing right at the nature of this faulty operating system.
Yeah.
Right.
And another good question to ask oneself is like, okay, so where in my life am I hanging out for the fruit to ripen and just drop into my lap? As opposed to doing what I'm supposed to do in order to bring the water of life to my heart.
How I got distracted and I'm choosing this other way out, and it's not the right way.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's tying right into this whole thing. And
right.
It was waiting for the fig, like hoping that this latest drug or relationship or anything else I'm seeking, is that the thing that's going to fulfill me when I'm just avoiding something that's more important.
Right. Avoiding, again, just going, I mean, I don't know. Enough said. It's so rich, right? It really is. And you could really go into a number of pieces to this. So now let's take, that's an ancient Greek story, and obviously we see how it plays out.
And it's a lesson there. It's almost like a warning, or maybe even it's marking the gate that we have to go through in order to access that new life, right? Like here's what's going on.
Yes.
You have to get through this. Like you don't get to graduate or evolve until you get that one figured out. That's kind of what I'm picking up from that. It's not so much like we're stuck there, but it's a transitional part of what we have to face. It's sort of showing us what might be operating, right?
And so let's add this a couple of pieces here, because it's Mars. It's how you decide and act in life. Okay, it's how decide and act. It's also, as I said, Mercury, which the Raven represents aspects of Mercury and Mars in a certain way. It kind of represents a number of things. But him flying back to, I'm going to say him, she, whatever, flying back to Apollo, flying back to the sun. That's the retrograde.
I see.
Mercury coming back to the sun, and he's coming back with this trick, with this falsehood by which he's going to live by. And the more he's invested in that excuse, anyway, we
gets further into trouble, doesn't he?
Yeah, we get that piece. But because these are all happening now in the context, and like I said, in the context of you doing this work with the Warrior Weekend, is we get to be in sync with the universe being honest with ourselves and open to what is the heart and the spirit really asking us to do, and how can I reform, because it's this death and rebirth also of the way that the mind works, the trickster energy. I'd rather say that in this case, the underworld, which is the unconscious. How does the subconscious operate, can emerge? Because that's where the habits are, right? The habits are those parts of the subconscious that are embodied. And by
How we
the
trick
way,
and fool ourselves ultimately, and cheat ourselves out of the real fruit, the real growth.
exactly. And by the way, it's not, I mean, we're talking about it in the context of those who are addicted, but this applies to everybody, because
Absolutely.
you may not have chosen a substance as your distraction, and of course we know there's other kinds of addiction, but I'm actually referring to people who are like, okay, well, I'm not addicted, I'm not addicted to sex, I'm not addicted to alcohol or drugs or whatever. Well, what is your addiction? What is your
Well, for
excuse
sure.
that's keeping you from
It could be ego or media,
Yeah.
or it could be any number of things that's keeping them from accessing
any number of things.
their truth.
And so that's where, being vulnerable and being really honest with, and allowing spirit to work through you, because it's underworld. It's not, we're using our minds and we're talking about this and kind of getting excited, but it's really operating in the deeper waters, and bringing this stuff up.
Speaking of the deeper waters,
Yeah.
there's another interpretation that we talked about earlier, which I think brings us around full circle to really understand another layer of this, because there's many ways that we can look at this, and each one is another facet, like a diamond, right? You turn it and you see another part of the beauty and the sparkle of this. And so will you share a little bit about, this other approach that kind of comes up?
So, as we know, there's Raven is a wonderful medicine. It's wonderful energy. There's many stories around Raven.
Creator, trickster,
Old
the
world,
stealer of fire,
old world as well as new world.
Yes.
And and kind of bringing it a little bit into new world. And I'm not going to reference any specific story, but really more about what is Raven is associated with magic. And if we kind of associate things like magic there's so many different ways that magic can happen. It's, being open to the synchronicities, which is really about allowing this connection and being aware and observing and a bunch of things. But it's also taking certain actions that allow, realities to manifest for ourselves, right? I mean, if you didn't act on your dream, this wouldn't be happening, right?
That's right.
In some respects, that's the magic of Dan, of bringing, some medicine to that. So anyway, so Raven represents magic. And, I'm going to kind of go directly to, well, what is one of the medicines is that when Raven comes into our experience, it allows us to look into the dark corners. And rather than turning away from them, but to see where the magic is, or the gold. I'm mixing metaphors here, but where there's medicine. So if you're allowing yourself to look into the dark corners of your own unconscious, or the parts of your life that you'd rather turn away from, and you find the medicine there, in one's own journey. I could think of an example with myself, and it's kind of not fair to point to yours, but
why not?
But I'm gonna.
Okay.
What led you here? Well, you had a journey with that. You had a journey with those things, and so that initially was a dark corner of your life, but you chose to look into it, and you found your medicine.
Right on.
You found some healing that you could bring to others.
Maybe that's why all of this has happened. And that's what we begin to suspect as we unravel our own threads.
Right. So rather than, we can shift our focus and our intent from seeing the Raven in this old world story as the screw up.
Right. At least he's in a bad bind. He's really messed things up.
He's in a bind there.
But,
we can shift and look at it to where's the cleverness? Where is the magic? And where's the way showing? Because that's another aspect. And when we really study Raven medicine, it's not from the Google search or the book or the whatever. You can sit with an elder, but that's implying interpretation, and we know that in terms of original indigenous knowledge, is that if you've been invited to become relative with a particular kind of medicine, you study it.
You doubt them.
And you truly become relative to it. So you serve it. It's not a tool that you access and do something with. You're serving it and letting it serve you.
It's a spiritual ally.
It's a spiritual ally. So how does the raven live? I mean, there's a bunch of things about, ravens are, I don't know if this is relevant, but ravens mate for life, and they can live for 20 years. But they also, to go back to that notion of being a way shower of signs and things like that.
In daytime energy, the solar power, right?
Yeah.
They're always active in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they, if a hunter goes out, I mean, just to use it, put it as a human example, a hunter goes out and shoots a deer, but he doesn't get a clean kill, and the deer goes off. Well, in the North Woods, you will look for where the ravens have congregated. They'll tell you where that deer is, right?
Yes.
And they work symbiotically with wolves. The wolves get a kill, the ravens are one of the first ones to show up, I mean, there's others that will enter into this, but today we're talking about
And they
ravens.
play together, and they seem to have their own little dance that they do together.
Right.
And, yeah.
And they too, they will do the same thing, because wolves may notice, well, okay, where are some of those ravens? They don't really flock like crows, They're very family oriented and individualistic, and have these incredible memories. And
I'm thinking of Odin's
intelligence.
ravens too, right? Thought and memory
Yeah.
comes into mind as well, going
Yeah.
into the old world, right?
Yeah. So if you can convert this notion of, well, where am I making excuses and that's preventing me from getting to my core, to where's my medicine? What is in the dark corner that's offering me a medicine here?
Well,
So these are all, really powerful teachings and the opportunities to shift our awareness, to shift our focus, to shift the way we're acting in the world, the way we're thinking about it, our perspective. And just to kind of wrap just a little more into it, as though there isn't enough.
right.
But on Saturday, the new moon will be a crescent, and it'll be visible with Venus. So Venus representing this feminine principle, or how we attract, and other things. But that, it's not exactly the same, because she goes through a death and rebirth process at other times too, but this is part of her being able to imagine or see the world in a different way. And it's in a more expansive way. And so, since these things live within all of us, because Mars doesn't just belong to men, Mars is in women, and likewise, and so that Hieros Gamos, or the sacred marriage, is best integrated within oneself. That's one of the shift of the paradigms. If we've really truly integrated that within ourselves, this balance of masculine and feminine, and then enter a relationship, then we're not asking the other, she may be willing to meet our needs, and we might be willing to meet her needs, but the whole point is that it's our quest to become more full, and then entering that conscious, equal relationship.
Versus unconsciously over-delegating our internal responsibilities outwardly in those other things.
Yeah.
And that's part of the trick that we play, right?
Right.
In that case then. So how do you realign that?
Yeah.
As suggested by that.
Yeah, and so what might we be attracting and envisioning for our future? In particular about how the assertive masculine principle would be operating in life.
This is so amazing, because this is really at the essence of what the weekend's about.
It's exactly right.
It's helping
That's why I
guys
got so
to
excited,
face.
dude.
Yeah, I know. You told me this. Now I'm really
whoa.
starting to see it. It's a beautiful opportunity, etched in the stars.
Yes.
And it'll be mirrored below in the
Yes.
work that we do on the ground, where we're purifying the land and that sort of toxic stuff going on the earth and in our bodies, purifying, and also releasing those shadows, releasing the resistance to face it. to turn and face it and say, yeah, this is who I want to be, and this is what's standing in my way. And that's the nature of the Sober Clean Warrior weekend and certification. It's a minor initiation into that new self.
Yeah.
What a wonderful opportunity to see that connection.
Really powerful. And I would just add one other piece. I've been focusing on, one-to-one relationship. Obviously, it goes beyond, cisgender, man, woman, and stuff like that, because it's also about co-equal relationship with all life.
There you go.
Right?
Yes.
Instead of dominating the earth, what's our co-relationship? How do we arrive as co-creators and equal, which is the way it was meant to be in the first place. We weren't really supposed to dominate
It suggests
nature.
a radical shift.
It's
Yeah.
a radical shift. And so even beyond what's immediate and what's personal, I mean, not that you have to have your mind go to how are we changing the world. Change yourself and the world will change around you, that adage. So if one is just really focused on how do I get beyond my addiction or this part of my life that's not functioning very well, it's still going to add to that. But be aware that every time we're bringing something new into our subconscious and into our way of being and how our social interactions, etc., we're helping create that new world. And so why not also just imagine how do you want to show up in the world, in relationship? It's really, really.
That sounds like a very good question to ask at the fire.
Great.
So
This is a good one.
this weekend, October 8th, 9th, and 10th, there's still time to sign up. So go to www.sevenfeatherssociety, that's 2 S's, that's feathers a plural, .org. And I think we can post a link on this for that, and also to contact Jeffrey if you'd like to connect with him and receive spiritual advisoryship or healing work or other sorts of skills that he has to offer. I understand you do also shamanic readings and that sort of thing, and all sorts of activities. So,
And astrology, of course.
and astrology, that's
Yeah.
right. Here we are. So Jeffery Grundtner, and we'll also post his name on the site. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've gone a little over time, but thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the next cast of Warrior Evolution, the Homestead Studio, Episode 1. Thank you for joining us. Oh, thanks,
Thank you.
brother.
Thank you.